Tyler, just this morning, Jerod Mayo was asked if he still sees there being a quarterback competition between Drake Maye and Jacoby Brissett, and he said, "I do." So what is your reaction to hearing that?
Yeah, I mean, after that encouraging performance last night, you at least would like to see that the door is still open for a guy like Drake Maye to be the week one starter. I still think that it would take a little bit more in terms of what he would be able to do with practice and, of course, whatever they do in the final preseason game against the Commanders for him to ultimately unseat Jacoby Brissett. But ultimately, it is encouraging what we've seen from Drake Maye so far, particularly in this game against the Philadelphia Eagles. You know, it was a rough week for the Patriots. You know, there was kind of doom and gloom coming off of that joint practice. But Drake Maye is at least giving you that glimmer of hope looking into the future. Had a couple of bright spots in that game, albeit in a loss. A really nice throw to Javon Baker. He just couldn't come down with the catch. But you could see the raw ability of him being able to flick the ball 60 some odd yards down the field, and of course ran for that touchdown. I think that that's something that Patriots fans should keep specific attention to. I don't know if his mobility, Drake Maye's mobility, is something that's necessarily on people's radar, but he did run for over 400 yards and 9 touchdowns at UNC a year ago, 1,200 yards rushing in his collegiate career. So that is a part of his game. That wasn't necessarily just a broken down play and he rushes for a touchdown. That is something that he will be able to deploy in his rookie season or whenever he gets in under center. So overall, interesting to hear Jerod Mayo say that the job is still open, but I would wait to see until we ultimately see him on the field.
Yeah, a little spice for the morning, and it was interesting to see the difference between how the Patriots performed when Drake Maye was on the field compared to Jacoby Brissett, because he was less impressive than the rookie in yesterday's game. So what stood out to you when Jacoby Brissett was on the field with the Patriots in yesterday's preseason game?
Yeah, you know, I think the thing that we talk about with Jacoby Brissett, obviously, you know, we know what he is in terms of where he stands in the pantheon of NFL quarterbacks. He's not somebody that's coming in to help elevate the rest of the roster around him, right? He's not a Patrick Mahomes that's going to make any wide receiver better just because they're playing with him, similar to what we saw with Tom Brady. That's just not who Jacoby Brissett is. Who Jacoby Brissett is, or at least what he is being billed as, is someone who is giving you a higher ceiling. He's been in the league for a long time, played in a lot of systems, specifically knows Alex Van Pelt's offense. So it is a little discouraging. So when you see him last night throw an end zone interception, that's just not something that he needs to be able to do if he's going to run this offense. That's the things that we're not expecting him to do. He's not expected to put the Patriots in those bad situations. He's not necessarily going to throw for a 90-yard touchdown or anything like that, but he should not be able to throw those end zone interceptions. That's what's going to lose him a job to Drake Maye. As much as we're talking about him possibly ascending for his play alone, if Jacoby Brissett continues to play like that, it's going to be a lot easier for Drake Maye to come in and be QB1.
Yeah, crazy that there is a quarterback competition, considering where it felt like a week ago with the way Drake Maye was talked about in practice, and of course with Jacoby Brissett just being the veteran of this team. I thought it was telling, Tyler, after the game that Patriots head coach Jerod Mayo said there was a, quote, dramatic problem with the offensive line, and he was really speaking to the depth of the offensive line. How concerning is it to hear that from Jerod Mayo after the game?
Yeah, no, it really is, because it's an acknowledgement that this is not up to snuff. It's something that we've been talking about here for the last couple of weeks, something I've been writing about on CBSSports.com. The offensive line in general is the big question mark for the New England Patriots in terms of whether or not they're going to have success on the offensive side of the ball. And, you know, you talk about depth. The thing that really stood out to me is the depth behind David Andrews at center. Obviously, we know that he is one of the best centers in the NFL. When he's in, you don't really have to worry about it, but he is an aging player, someone who may or may not have flirted with retirement this offseason. So he's clearly in the twilight of his career. You don't necessarily know what he's going to bring or how available he may be. Again, he's playing on the offensive line. There's always questions about injuries there. And if he were to go down, we've seen last night that the center position is a weakness for the Patriots in terms of depth. A lot of botched snaps. I believe there were 3 fumbles between the quarterback and the centers last night. 2 of them were recovered, but of course, that last one between Bailey Zappi ended up proving to be the dagger in this game in terms of their comeback hopes. Again, it's preseason. These game results don't necessarily matter, but that's something we need to keep an eye out for. Obviously, you don't want to see David Andrews go down or anything like that, but if he were, they would be in a dire straits there, specifically at center. But overall, I still think that the offensive line is a question. Vidarian Lowe is someone who we've talked about. He's been their starting left tackle pretty much throughout the summer, throughout training camp in the preseason. He let up a couple of big hits. He had a penalty early in this game as well. That's a major question. I think that you mentioned Jerod Mayo talking about QB1 still being up for grabs. He even said, too, that the offensive line won't be an impediment to Drake Maye if it's struggling, but Drake Maye outperforms Jacoby Brissett. He will still be the starting quarterback of the Patriots. I don't necessarily love that. I would want the offensive line to be solidified before we bring in Drake Maye, but it is interesting to hear Mayo talk about that nonetheless.
Let's talk about the Patriots pass rush now. It was led by Keion White last night. He had another promising performance along with, the Patriots' entire pass rush, and this, of course, comes after the team traded Matthew Judon. So does what you saw against the Eagles make you less concerned about how this unit might look this year?
Mildly. I'll be honest and say mildly, because again, you do have to recognize that the Eagles were not playing their starting offense in this game. We didn't see Lane Johnson and all of those, relatively stud offensive line, one of the better offensive lines in the league out there. So you have to throw that grain of salt in there. But overall, Dietrich Wise, Josh Uche, Keion White, they are able to apply pressure. There are players along this front 7 that will be able to get after the quarterback. But trying to replace a player like Matthew Judon at his full health, and of course Christian Barmore, who's out indefinitely with that blood clot issue, that's going to be a tough thing for the Patriots to kind of make up for. Jerod Mayo said after the game that they're going to have to manufacture pass rush in certain situations, and I think you saw that a little bit in this game last night. I think they got Kenny Pickett for 4 sacks in the first half. Like, they were really getting after it. They have players available to them. It's just a matter of how they're going to step up. I think Josh Uche is an interesting one. He played deep into the game last night, had a sack in this game. Not too long ago, he had double-digit sacks in a single season. So he's someone who I think that we could look out for, along with Keion White, Anthony Jennings, and Dietrich Wise.
Were you surprised to see Josh Uche playing as late into the game as he did against the Eagles?
You know what, I was, and then I saw somebody astutely point out on social media, pointing back to Jerod Mayo's comments earlier in the week, if any of these presumptive veterans fought in that joint practice against the Philadelphia Eagles, they would be playing deep into the preseason game. So I think that's exactly what it was. Josh Uche was kind of involved in the only real scrum, and in using a fight is kind of, I think, more glorified term. It was more of a little light scrap during kickoff drills, but he was involved in the lone kind of skirmish of that session. So I think that's what it was. So if you're a Patriots fan wondering, hey, is Josh Uche on the bubble? Is he somebody that could be at risk of losing his roster spot because he's playing so deep into a preseason game? I don't think that's necessarily what it was. I actually think it was a little bit of a punishment from Jerod Mayo.
Let's go to the wide receiver core. And obviously it's a young group. You and I have talked about that a lot. What did you think of the way they played overall in this game?
Yeah, encouraging. I mean, we talked about Baker. He's had his moments throughout camp. He's going to be that big play receiver in this offense, I think, in terms of just those, pop plays. We saw the potential of it last night with that deep throw from Drake Maye. It was a perfectly thrown ball. I would have liked Baker to kind of just run through the pass instead of trying to dive and make the grab. He still got both hands on it, was unable to make the grab, but you see the potential that's there for that type of connection. They connected earlier in the game as well on a really nice pass from Drake Maye. It was kind of a deep slant. I thought that was one of the better throws from Maye on the night. And you look at Jalen Polk too, not necessarily the flashiest showing in terms of production, but you saw him be a little slippery. There was a pass just out in the flat at the line of scrimmage, and he broke, I believe it was like 2 tackles, and was able to get some sort of positive gain. Again, it's not like it's a 90-yard touchdown or anything like that, or anything close to what we saw Baker possibly do, but you're just seeing those little flashes of these players proving why they were so touted by the Patriots enough that they went and drafted them in the first place, specifically with Polk high upon day 2 of the NFL draft. I think that these players are going to have their moments. Again, they're rookies. They're going to go through some lumps. I think Baker needs to be a little bit more physical off the line of scrimmage. I noticed that he was getting kind of pushed out of bounds when he was trying to move up the sideline a little bit. So you have to be a little bit more physical in the NFL. But overall, an encouraging performance specifically for them from those two.
Yeah, no, still you would have loved to see Javon Baker come down with that catch on the deep throw from Drake Maye, because that would have been the highlight of the game. But on the Patriots side, it obviously really ends up being that rushing touchdown for Drake Maye. Let's end with this, Tyler. How about Joe Milton trucking an Eagles defensive player in this game? I know in terms of the overall stats, not quite as impressive as to what he did in the first preseason game, but another highlight reel type of play out of him. When you include that, what did you think of his performance in this game specifically?
Yeah, I think it was more from what we've seen in practice, right? I mean, obviously he was impressive late in the preseason opener against players that aren't necessarily going to be fighting for starting jobs in the NFL in the coming weeks. They're probably more practice squad players, but still an impressive showing from Milton nonetheless. And then you translate it to this game, and it's a little bit more what we see in practice during training camp. A little bit of inefficiencies, but certainly flashing that raw ability that we saw at Tennessee in the SEC. And it's encouraging to see him being a willing kind of, physical runner when he decides to scramble. But he did even note after the game that some players in the coaching staff say, hey, listen, if you want to have a long NFL career, lowering the shoulder in a preseason game isn't necessarily the best way to do that. So, it's fun for us to see and fun for us to talk about and post on social media. But from a, being available the next week, it's not necessarily the right move for Joe Milton. But overall, again, you see the talent. And I do think that it was telling that he was the third quarterback up, after Drake Maye and Jacoby Brissett, and Bailey Zappi was kind of led to just play out the string in the fourth quarter. I really think that if they stick with 3 quarterbacks, he is the third quarterback, and then Bailey Zappi gets cut when we get down to the 53-man roster. Possibly Zappi would come back via the practice squad, very similar to what we saw a year ago. But if they're sticking with 3 quarterbacks, I don't know how you get rid of Joe Milton simply because of that raw ability we've seen over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, well as fans of football and of course people covering this team, you enjoy seeing stuff like that because you get to talk about it. And I love his attitude after the game, basically saying that the defender didn't hit him, he hit the defender. So all in all, a fun game for the Patriots. They did lose 14-13, but talking about the quarterbacks, those young quarterbacks, Drake Maye showing out, Joe Milton playing at the end. Tyler Sullivan of CBS Sports, thanks so much for joining us as always.